Welcome to Reddit Aliens. People who spend days, weeks, or months at sea. What is the creepiest or most unsettling thing you've seen out there or that has happened to you? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Two things, both off the east coast of Tasmania on a fishing trawler, but on different occasions. One of the deckhands slipped and a fish pick went straight through his eye. I was on deck and remember it happening in very slow motion. It took over 12 hours for a chopper to come and lift him to hospital. I'll never forget the screaming. 2. One night on deck after pulling up the net, everyone could hear a man yelling. We couldn't quite hear exactly what they were saying, but they were obviously distressed. The strange thing was that we were on deck before sunset and we didn't see anyone or anything else around. We called out and searched for hours. We saw and found nothing. There were no reports of missing fishermen, ships, distress signals, etc. Scared the shit out of everyone and was a very quiet trip for the rest of the week. Sailing on a tall ship off the south coast of Ireland, a heavy fog rolled in. There was still light from the sun to see by, but it was just white in every direction I looked. I climbed up on the top of the main mast and looking down, I could see a perfect circle of water just encircling the ship, then nothing. It felt like we were floating in a simulation, and was simultaneously one of the coolest and eeriest things I've experienced. We were anchored out of France, and I was on the sponson, did I spell that right? Smoking. I watched a little red light creep along underwater next to the ship for a good 10 minutes. It was smooth and slow moving, scared me, but I kept thinking I'm on a Navy ship. I can see all the lights. The absolute feeling of aloneness, not loneliness, different. In the middle of the night, no moon or stars, just the darkness, the hum of the ship, and the sound of your own breathing. If you stare off into the darkness too long, you can kind of feel it pulling you, almost hypnotic. Sounds cheesy, but so effing true. I always kept my back to the wall, just to ground myself. It was about 11:30 p.m. We were about 200 miles away from the nearest point of land. Saw a white flare go off. I let the officer of the watch know and gave him rough bearings. Flare was no more than 10 miles away. The officer got the captain. Captain told us to head in that direction. There was nothing in that direction according to the radar, but better safe than sorry. Captain wasn't too worried as it wasn't a distress flare. Followed the path for half an hour but came across nothing, so we went back to our normal course. Right before the watches swapped at 0000 and right before we turned back on course, heard some whistling on VHF channel 16, normally the distressed frequency, but still nothing on our radars. The captain still wasn't concerned, so we left it at that. I made a log of the events and our coordinates just in case something did happen and someone was actually lost at sea, but nothing was ever reported by the Coast Guard or any other vessel. I was backpacking through Panama and sailed down to Colombia on a sailboat. A day or so past the San Bias Islands, we were in open ocean. Everywhere you looked was ocean until the horizon. One night, we got stuck in a bad storm and lightning was right over top of us, and I was asleep in the bunk when lightning struck very close to us and woke me up and scared me half to death. I went out on the deck to try to calm down as it was around 3 a.m. I found the captain out on the deck looking off towards the horizon. He was staring at this black shape that we could only see when lightning struck in the distance. He said it was probably a small island, but there were no islands in the area. I watched it really closely and noticed it was moving and fast. The shape was pitch black, and I soon came to the conclusion it was a boat, and not a regular boat. It was a drug-running boat. They kept all of their running lights and navigation lights off to remain hidden from prying eyes. Needless to say, that was a bit unnerving, as the area is known for drug smuggling and pirates. The captain ended up grabbing the spear gun and said just make sure they keep heading north and not toward us. Of course, seeing a mythological sea creature or UFO would be frightening in and of itself, but oftentimes reality can be even more frightening, like pirates or drug smugglers. 1. There's this time on sea called Teapot, total period of darkness. It's nothing much, but there is no moon during this time. Moreover, as there is absolutely no source of light in the open sea, so Teapot can get a little weird. You would see absolutely nothing. It's just your ship sailing into nothingness while the waves splatter your bows. 2. Saw pirates once in the Indian Ocean. Now, When you see a vessel on the edge of the horizon, there's no telling how long it will take for you two to come across. But this small pirate boat took, I think, a minute or so to cross our bows. They had a couple of AK-47s and had covered their faces. And yes, they had a very fast boat. Most unsettling experience was a man overboard drill we conducted in the evening. We dropped Oscar over the side with his PFD and emergency light. After turning the ship around, the sun was all but gone. I tried to keep an eye on the PFD light the entire time. As Oscar drifted between the waves, it put into perspective of how important it is to keep an eye on someone who's fallen overboard. Even a blink and you'll lose where it is. How small you are compared to such vast ocean of nothing. Probably when the ship goes completely silent from a power failure. No vibrations, no sound of air coming through the duct, and no lights except for battle lanterns. This happens between the loss of main power and the start of emergency power, or when the main sea pump was losing suction. It was fluctuating the frequency of the generators, causing the lights to go bright and dim in quick succession until the generator tripped due to overspeed. Saw pirates off the African coast by Djibouti. Often take my smallish fishing boat with me, or sometimes another person on board for a night or two. Marine mammals coming close to the bait of a dark night and breathing is pretty unsettling. Dead quiet, and then a bloody great exhalation. Seeing whales in the sounder less than 20 feet under the boat is pretty strange, and you just gotta hope they look before they surface and don't get wrapped up with the anchor. The worst, however, was waking up to find the anchor had let go, and I was drifting on a moonless night, completely disoriented and still not fully awake. Took a while to process what had happened, and the realization process was not fun. Worked on a cruise ship. We had an Oscar call, man overboard. The ship turned on a dime, almost sideways, to turn around to get him. When the rescue boat tried to pull him out of the water, he kept swimming away from them, yelling, "Don't take me back there. You can't take me back there. I won't go with you. I'm not going to die." He had stopped taking some meds, apparently, and thought all the employees on board were in a cult and wanted to kill him. So when I started reading this story, I just assumed it was a man overboard drill and that it was a dummy in the water. So when the dummy then started speaking, I was like, well, that's weird. But then I realized, oh, I'm the dummy. Probably how much trash there is. When you're hundreds of miles from the nearest human and you see a Mountain Dew can float by or a whale entanglement, it's pretty upsetting. Or sitting darkened ship in complete darkness, looking at the most stars you've ever seen and realizing how tiny you really are. Most unsettling thing I've ever seen was actually on a relatively short trip, relatively close inland. We were on this big old catamaran of all things, just headed out on a day trip in the fall. It was a quite cool fall day, raw, gray, and rainy, on the coast of New England. Actually, very rainy, but the drink seemed calm enough from shore. So about 200 landlubbers who don't normally do any boating cram onto the boat. You've got about 3 levels inside, with the deck on the first, then another topside above, and this thing normally whips at about 30 knots. Anyways, we get out there a bit, and it gets rougher than it looked. The boat's getting tossed around some. I'm running around the deck and topside, getting positively soaked by some of the heaviest rain I've been outside in. Then I go inside. It was like what I imagined the effing plague was like in the 1300s. I mean, it looked like a scene out of some post-apocalyptic movie where everyone got Ebola or something. Just dozens and dozens of people, all close to each other, not enough buckets, all at various stages of puking or having just puked. Effing vomit was everywhere. The stench was totally unbearable. People were just horking up bile by near the end of it. The higher floors were no better. I went topside and dealt with the driving rain and getting tossed around just to avoid the plague. It was probably the second closest to hypothermia I've ever gotten. I was frozen to the bone getting off that effing boat, and I didn't eat all day because the puke party was so gross. Mildly not safe for work. A story I heard from when I was in the Navy, but a couple of years ago on a ship, there was a male creeping around jerking off guys while they slept. Someone thought they were having a wet dream and woke up to the guy giving him a handy, but the creep ran away before he was caught. They called him the rack slang for bed Jack Bandit, and to this day, his identity remains unknown. Here's a positive one. Someone else mentioned the total period of darkness. However, if you're in an area with plenty of stars, this period is one of the most beautiful natural phenomena you can find. Combine this with totally still seas, and the reflection makes it appear like a boat is traveling through space, a transcendent experience. I've seen more creepy stuff in port than at sea, e.g. a man hung himself from his mast one Christmas. I was giving a briefing on deck and didn't notice until the police arrived to cut him down. I moved my guys below deck pretty quickly then, but was not comfortable with how long we'd had a corpse in our vista. I've also been followed along a quay by a masturbating fisherman. I didn't like that, as there was nobody else on my boat and only the sea beyond it. Fortunately, he was, like most slashers, totally non-confrontational, so I could do a 180 back to the crew in the bar. It still shook me how unnerved and vulnerable I felt for those few minutes though. At sea, I suppose the creepiest thing was still fairly coastal, doing an overnight crossing from the Berlinix to the mainland. I was caught out by an unforecasted lightning storm. My crew was very inexperienced and hadn't even packed waterproofs. Also, the boat had a carbon fiber mast, which is great for weight and stability, but can explode if hit by lightning. So it was a tough night anyway. Then, I heard a mayday of a man overboard, only 20 meters from us. It was a hard decision to carry on away from the boat in distress and toward the edge of the weather system. The good news is that they found him alive at dawn. It was still a wet, fraught, and guilt-ridden night listening to the search until then. My ship was doing a transatlantic in the middle of winter. We kept receiving updated optimized routes because of the number of storms around us. Sea conditions got to the point where our CO told the crew that unless they were going on watch, non-essential work was suspended. While this was going on, our mast gained some cracks as well as some of our superstructure. We had piping on the weather deck get partially ripped from the bulkhead. So this is a story from my dad. He spent 14 years in the US Navy serving aboard nuclear fast attack submarines. This story is more unsettling than it is creepy. He and his boat were deployed in the North Sea, and about a week into the voyage, one of the senior enlisted crew members died of a heart attack. Well, submarines have very tight operational security, which means once they go under the water, they can't come up unless it's an emergency or they reach a US naval base. So when this guy died, only a week into their operation, they only had one choice: put him in the freezer. So there was a dead member of their crew in the freezer for nearly 2 months. Oh, and because they had to clear out room to fit him, everyone on board was ordered to eat a triple serving of ice cream or it would go bad. Returning from deployment during Desert Storm, we were in the middle of the Atlantic, like seriously, middle of nowhere, deep ocean. Suddenly, we had a contact on the radar. As we get closer, it's this seriously small, like 40 feet or so sailboat with an old guy standing up waving his arms and hailing us. As we draw closer, it's a little old man on this boat in the middle of nowhere with only his dog. We thought for sure he needed assistance, but nope, just wanted to know if we had any cigarettes we could give him. We ended up giving him some fresh water, extra food, a couple of ship's hats and t-shirts, and he was on his way. So imagine that, thousands of miles from anything. Dude just needed some smokes. I've been very close to overboard in the Bering. I was on top deck and hit by a rogue wave. It smashed me right under the wheelhouse windows and then towards the side of the boat was tipped. I was able to grab onto the rail and hold on while the boat righted itself, but the water hit me with such a force I was temporarily blind and deaf, and it even shot up my ass. Also, once we brought up a discarded crab pot on a long line boat, and as a buddy was trying to cut it loose, it almost pulled him over. Not my boat, but same company, a guy went over, and he was moving down the side of the boat. The cook was able to spear him through the shoulder with a pole gaff attached to a rope and save him. I'm sure I'm forgetting a lot. We've lost power at sea. I've seen a few guys have hooks dragged through their arms, tearing everything out. Lots of accidents like that, but this is getting long. Waking up to flying through the air out of my bunk and across the hall into the head. Suicide. That's what I can think of for now. I'm probably late. You're not. But we were doing boardings in the Gulf Coast near Mexico, and we came across this anchored fishing vessel, FV. Not a big deal, but he was lifting toward one side a little bit too much. Hailed out to her, letting her know we were attempting to board and see what's best side for them was. No answer. We boarded the vessel, and we do call-outs on board. No answer. No one was on board, but our boarding officer goes down below to see what the lifting was for. Maybe this FV is going to be a search and rescue case. We make sure it's gas-free before going below deck. The BO comes back up coughing. The rest of the team goes down there, and we see below deck was a very misconstrued wall that had a very distinct smell to it. We thought it was old fish. We break down the wall because maybe it's drugs or guns. It was a wall of flayed bodies that the hitmen of the cartels would bring to this ship. Needless to say, it was pretty gross.